Welcome to Nickel City Chronicles. Today, my co-host today is my brother Scott Senlak, and our special guest is Zach Bourque, who has an interesting tale to tell us, and we're going to get into some of the deeper philosophical aspects of what we're talking about. So,
meditation,
Zach,
yeah, we're talking about meditation.
yeah, meditation. So, Zach, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you.
Give us a rundown.
Yeah. So this is something that would be interesting to David Lynch fans or people who are interested in meditation or Twin Peaks or the entire discussion of consciousness and expanding one's consciousness and what that's really about. A couple years ago, I found out about the school in Fairfield, Iowa, Maharishi. It was called then Maharishi University of Management. It changed while I was there to Maharishi International University. So it's a school that incorporates Transcendental Meditation, which Lynch fans have no doubt heard him talk a lot about.
Me being included.
Yeah. And so this was after years of living in Buffalo and living paycheck to paycheck and meditating on my own. And really, really suffering a lot. That's why I was meditating. I had a panic disorder, a generalized kind of anxiety thing, and also sometimes like some bouts of depression. Sometimes pretty bad. It seemed to just be like, when it's just like that human cocktail, that horrible thing.
You like just can't even move. Yeah.
The human condition cocktail. But I was also starting to gain some understanding and gain some experience of this pure awareness or this witness self. Enough so that when the Twin Peaks Return came out in 2017, it came out in the summer of 2017.
Yep.
I was extremely excited to hear about it, or when it came out. And then I was talking about this with Scott. How far away from disappointed I was.
Yeah. So good.
That there was a kind of a confluence of things going on when I was watching it, because one, something about it to me had a palpable it was a very, very palpable expression of awareness, of this pure consciousness, this field of silence that I always only heard him talking about. And I was starting to dip into it myself. And I was writing notes about it and getting very excited about it and feeling like I was catching on to something. And then I see kind of what's going on in this show. And it almost felt like it was a culmination of everything Lynch had been working with. And also it was the strongest expression of this silence and this peace. That's why I think it was like kind of the lightest, in a way, one of the lightest things he's ever made.
Yeah.
Because it's something about it is just happy. Even in the most rotten, scary things. Something about it was just like, had this humor and happiness. And there was just this unmistakable kind of like synthesis of awareness with the objects on the screen. Yeah. There was just this really, really happy relationship going on.
And that's interesting too, because like I think of watching The Return. I remember talking to Andrew about it, and we talked about how like we can put that in like a room somewhere and not tell anyone like what it is, and then just to see their reaction to like how they react to like what they were watching, basically. Because just how like elegant and how like beautiful some of it was, and then how like grotesque it can be.
Absolutely.
So
I mean, my reaction to the first episode. In the first episode, you see the creature or the woman in the box, who I believe is Judy.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Rip open the glass and my reaction
mutilate.
Was, oh my God. I was watching it with Andrew and his girlfriend at the time, and my mouth was just hanging open. I'm falling out of my mouth. Oh my God.
It's terrifying.
So David Lynch has this ability to bring about these visual concepts that can make you react a certain way and give you that and get
just
that
react,
yeah
basically.
Yeah, he has the super ability to do that,
or
like
just,
no other.
I feel weird. I feel like I'm not understanding enough. There's something here, and this is some kind of a dream.
So that made you want to explore David Lynch and where his mindset came from, right?
Well, I had already done a lot of exploring of David Lynch. I was ready to dive into the source of his own inspiration, which is the source of anyone's inspiration,
Right.
The source of mind and consciousness. Because it was almost like I had done my ramshackle version of meditating and trying to find the truth, which was a big mixture of like suffering and confusion and frustration and moments of clarity. And I guess there must have been something about Lynch's integrity of his speech and his art that when he talked about TM, I was ready to take it to another level, like to be a part of something organized, or to at least be organized and in my practice and do something that would give me more ground, give me more to stand on. So that's so soon after the return is out, I find it on, I think, Facebook or something, and I quickly apply, and eventually I'm there. And it's the first weekend. It's after there's the whole orientation kind of week. At the very end of that week, only 5 days, they do this whole kind of show. It was called "It's College Bad for Your Brain," and it's basically just about TM. But the biggest selling point was that David Lynch was going to speak.
Nice.
He didn't end up speaking until the very end, but I'm kind of glad because I actually was really into everything they were talking about, spreading TM to military and schools and having people talk about it.
Wow.
And it was a beautiful thing. But at the very end, David talks, and that's where it's kind of because we're in the we're in an auditorium, and he's on a screen. On I don't even know if Zoom was the thing then, but I remember that's when I realized okay. It's been sort of a whirlwind of decision to get here. I frankly don't know where I am or kind of who I am.
Iowa,
it's in Fairfield, Iowa, which is actually definitely not anywhere. It's like an hour south of Iowa City.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking there's absolutely no way I'm not going to get up and talk to him because it was just this drive that wasn't even a drive. Yeah. It was no, it's absolutely going to happen.
Yeah.
And by the time I get up and talk to him, I'm like, it's on YouTube, and I'm wearing my winter jacket, and I felt like I was, I don't know, a little weird because I was also coming from this sort of truth-seeking mentality. And so everyone's asking him these pretty. I don't know. These pretty ordinary questions, and I come up and I say, "David, I want to talk to you about freedom," because that's one of his favorite words, and when he's talking about TM and growth and all of that.
Yeah.
And I said, "I want to talk about freedom. I've been experiencing the self. It's just as you say it, golden. And I really." But in TM, in the TM organization, they talk about dipping into pure consciousness and meditation, and then going about your business. Yeah. And that this alternation between rest and activity is the process of cultivating a higher state of consciousness that doesn't go away.
It was deep.
And I said, I don't get it when I'm going about my business, though. I only get it when I'm alone. And this is I was really kind of imbalanced.
Yeah.
Where I was having deep insights and deep experiences, but I was totally freaked out pretty much in every other way of my being.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Definitely.
So I just, I don't get it when I'm going about my business. I only get it when I'm alone. But I know what this thing is. And I can't keep living this half or third or quarter life of knowing truth and then being kind of a mess everywhere. I want my freedom to have legs in the world.
Right.
So can you tell me a little bit about that? And it felt so personal and so pointed to be talking about that way. But really, I gave him the softball question to what he's always talking about.
Yeah.
I gave him the softball question about TM and what's that about and what's it like.
Yeah, he's going to like talking to you, that's for sure.
And so I think he said, freedom. It's such a beautiful word.
You sound like him too.
And he talked about.
He did that really good.
Yeah, he talked about it doesn't happen overnight, and if you're transcending every day, the good comes in, and the bad goes. And it goes. And it's more and more every day. You know, so you've heard that.
Jeez.
But so, yeah, he gives me that and stuff. And I'm listening and I'm believing him.
Cool.
And then at the end of that exchange, because he ends his spiel with and by the you know, when you're done, that's full enlightenment. And I said, okay, and when we get there, will we already be there? Which was a quote from The Return.
Oh.
When you get there, you'll already be there.
Yeah.
That's deep right there.
In the Return, Cooper goes to this alternate dimension with like a purple ocean.
Yeah.
And meets this woman who's speaking backwards, as they did in the lodge in the first season. Mm-hmm. She goes, "When you get there, you will already be there."
There's sort of a Vedic philosophy behind that, whereas a lot of Taoists,
So perfect too.
a lot of Taoists, a lot of Buddhists too, they like to say that knowledge and experience is just remembering who we are. Like you're never gaining knowledge that wasn't already there. You're just remembering something that you've been sleeping on for your entire consciousness of your life. You know what I'm saying? There's something super deep about that.
Yeah,
compelling in that. So, anyways, keep going with you.
Yep. So I say, when we get there, will we already be there? I said it kind of like smugly because I think I planned on asking that, but his leading into it was so perfect.
Yeah.
I was like, and when we get there, will we already be there? And he could have been like, that's not what that means. But no, he said, you'll be there and you'll greet yourself.
See?
Wow.
And I just said, okay, oh God, okay. And that was it. That was the end. And I walked back and
he's a bad dude, though. David Lynch.
Man.
Well, here's
bad
the thing.
dude.
Just being, just hearing that story, like, I'm a fellow David Lynch. I'm obsessed with David Lynch. Like, I am inspired by Lynch. It was like the first film I saw of David Lynch's was actually Blue Velvet, which is actually pretty cohesive. One of his films that it's got a beginning, middle, end plot. It's you can actually follow along to what's happening. And I remember thinking that was a different universe. Before I really dove into David Lynch. I mean, just being someone that is such a huge fan of Lynch, my life has changed because of David Lynch. Like, and the fact that you actually went out and you sought out something because we talked about this before the podcast. Like, you just knew he knows what he's talking about. Like, he has like a good sense of grasp what's going on in the world. He knows he's got a pretty good. He seems like he's got things going for him pretty good. I gravitate towards him as well. And
I want to get into his philosophy that as much as I've read on him, but I also want to first talk about what happened after that. Like, what road did that lead you down?
Well, it got me really serious about meditation, and I did it. I started doing it, and I can. This isn't a pitch or anything, but I absolutely was knowing the results immediately. When I say immediately, from the first or second meditation, because having dipped into this pure awareness, this was somehow some kind of like direct route, a direct kind of experience of it, and go into what I called at the time a shocking emptiness. You'll hear about emptiness in the Buddhist language, which means being empty of a separate self, being empty, which in the experience of emptiness is actually a beautiful fullness and feeling like you are fully yourself, but only when you're empty of yourself.
Interesting.
So when I experienced TM for the first time, it was like this shocking emptiness. So I was like, all doubts and were kind of erased. And so I learned TM as part of the introductory course they do. Every student there learns it. Science and Technology of Consciousness was the name of the class.
Wow.
Where they really kind of just go at it from the most elementary standpoint. We talk about the materialist versus the consciousness paradigm of physics.
Wow.
And go into some of the Vedic philosophy, including like their philosophy on making buildings, Shapatya Veda and Ayurveda, and And so it was just a beautiful introduction. And so I was very dedicated, and I felt like it was this amazing gift. So I was a little bit on my own there. You might think that like you'd find your people or something, but it really wasn't like that at all.
Yeah.
I was really there going it alone, and
making a change, getting change in you, trying to make yourself be okay with yourself,
Yeah. So I was still kind of going through some difficulty, but it wasn't. I knew something had ended. A particularly difficult period had ended, and a new one began because it's just you knew it.
Yeah.
My experience of it was sometimes you get thoughts about it. You're like, yep, okay. So this is the evolutionary trough, is one way I had to describe it.
So that's crazy that you said that, because the spiritual awakening is something that a lot of different philosophies and cultures will draw upon. Whereas like there's this BC AD moment in everyone's life, and that was yours. So for some people it might be psychedelics. For some people it might be a song that blows them away, changes, or a film or scripture.
Well, I guess it was for me a little more of a progression. That it wasn't night and day,
Right.
but it definitely was something that brought in a new
Awakening.
Just a new mode of it.
Yeah.
Because earlier, like I said, in my early 20s, I had early experiences of what you'd call consciousness or God, brought on by intense suffering and intense confusion and panic and stuff.
Yep.
So that there was nothing else for me to do. I was in my room and I said, well, what is the source of this suffering? Because this is fucked up.
Yeah.
I'm like, so that was the question. Like, what's the source of the suffering? And that question came spontaneously, and I'm laying in bed, and that's what this question is starting to just run through my mind like a mantra, and it's like start to have a life of its own. And it knew to cut off the question. It knew to cut off the question and say, what is the source? I wasn't even doing it consciously.
Wow.
This question starts circulating, and then the question becomes, what is the source? And it becomes like, oh, obviously I should be asking what is the source, because my problem is with everything.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if I'm asking what's the source of all my problems, just ask what's the source.
Yeah.
So it starts to rage in my head, and the next minute I am in this sort of boundless field. And this is very hard to talk about. And the memory is strange, because I wasn't really in my body, I wasn't in my room, and I wasn't in any kind of like place where I could visually identify anything.
Yeah.
But there was still seeing. There was still a kind of being. And there was an intelligence, a light. And I felt like I was all there.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh. Like there was just like that. Imagine just that moment of, like I'd maybe bitten off something here.
Yeah.
Like I'd bitten off something.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I wasn't scared. Actually, I was very, very, very at peace.
Wow.
Which is a contrast to how I'd mostly been feeling.
Yeah.
And I remember having the thought of like, okay, so you're, and I'm, and that's the same thing. And it was sort of like, yeah.
So So now we're talking about the collective consciousness, right? The sort of thing you can tap into. Everyone has the ability to tap into, where we all have a self. Okay, even before Christianity took over the West, the ancient Greeks talked about know thyself, and that mind, all is mind, was Pythagoras' quote. And but there's Eastern and Western Vedic, whether it's Vedic or Greek, they kind of agree on this concept of a collective consciousness, which some people call God, some people call nature, some people call the universe, but it's something that is there that we can tap into and even gain something from and take something back from when we reach that level.
Yeah. Well, we're always taking something from it. Actually,
that's a good point.
Our self-images and our ideas about ourselves are actually pulled from this source. So it's much, much closer than you would ever imagine. It's impossible to imagine it being any closer than it is.
Right.
It's extremely close.
Yeah.
It's closer than close.
Yeah. And you were talking about having an experience that's sort of out of body, right? That we kind of were saying.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the kind of way that I was like looking at my body.
Yeah.
It was just sort of everything had disappeared.
Right.
Gotcha.
Because someone could argue, especially if you look at it from like the Marcus Aurelius viewpoint of meditation, where he actually wrote in his own words, to meditate is to try to focus on your breathing first, then two, to imagine yourself and really imagine the self, like actual self, not your ego, not what you want to think of yourself, how you really are. And then as soon as you can do that, then you can keep going beyond that, and then you can see the room that you're in, and you can see all your awareness and everything around you. And then he said that eventually you get so far out that it's like a bird's eye view of your house and your neighbors, and you get attain this level of meditation where you completely are out of your body, but you're aware of your body and you're aware of your breathing. And that was like the goal of his meditation, which is if anyone hasn't ever read Marcus Aurelius Meditations, it's just a classic. It came out of the West, out of all places, where Christianity was sort of, I don't want to say going against the whole self philosophy, but it really didn't have the West was really losing its ancient Greek sort of Pythagorean mindset and sort of going towards the Judeo-Christian mindset. But here's Marcus Aurelius, is this philosopher king, they wanted to call him, who actually did focus on meditation. The name of the book's called Meditations. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's pretty deep to think about that. And then you got the whole aspect of, so, you know, we talk about the meditation as like what is its purpose? Like, what do we do? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Yep. Like,
the purpose is to know thyself. And that's not something that you can sort of cobble together with your thoughts and say, that's myself. Okay, so I'm just this and I'm this. So, okay, that's myself. It's really beyond the thinking mind. And it's an immediate recognition of yourself as this boundless field of silence, which is also the perceiver of your mind and body, and yet is not entangled in it. So really you're always out of body because you're never in. Our sense of identity, the way it's conditioned, we're conditioned to identify as our bodies.
Yeah.
And so then we have a sensation of ourself being located in the body. And then we also have we have our sense of our identity located in the mind. And this actually creates a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because there's a bit of other separateness that comes from that.
And go ahead, Scott.
Yep. Well, I was going to kind of probably go a little bit off because I've heard of like the monkey mind. I don't know if you guys know what that is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is that like nothing to do with what we're talking about?
No, it's the thought stream. That's the kind of the mind.
Heard monkey mind. I didn't know. I forgot to bring that up earlier. Yeah, I just don't know what that is.
Monkey mind is sort of a loving way of patting the mind on the head as this sort of irreverent and irrelevant stream of thinking that goes from tree to limb to limb.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, monkey mind.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, because I was talking to somebody about getting involved. I was saying I was having somebody on the show. We're gonna talk about meditation. I'm really excited about it, and they were like, brought the monkey mind up twice, and I just didn't acknowledge it. I just kept going with the conversation, like, yeah, sure, yeah, the monkey mind, yeah.
Monkey mind is just mind.
Yeah, okay.
It's not like this other mind. Monkey mind is just the stream of thinking that everyone starts to notice more acutely, especially when they're trying to find silence.
And in the Dhammapada, which is the book ascribed to the Buddha, who was the first Buddha.
And I haven't read it.
Gautama, what's his last name? I can't remember. I can't pronounce it.
Oh, the Buddha's name?
Yeah, Gautama.
No, Siddhartha Gautama.
Siddhartha Gautama, yeah.
I know
so
that name. Yeah, I know that
he supposedly didn't write this, but his followers wrote it after he died. Sort of like a Christianity type of deal, where Jesus didn't write the New Testament, Matthew and Mark did. But regardless of that, in this, it addresses the biggest thing of this. What it addresses is the whole suffering aspect.
Yeah.
Is that you can't, like, this prince comes out. Actually, it's the Buddha. He was a prince, and he's basically sheltered his whole life. He's brought up in the Hindu faith, and he's, he knows all the Vedic philosophy. He knows he's up to date on all that. But for the first time in his life, he gets taken out of the kingdom and gets brought into the real world, where he sees suffering, he sees people dying, he sees people starving, he sees all this stuff that he's never seen in his life before, because he's been sheltered in his nice kingdom where everything's all good and fun, like
Until
great.
he was 29.
Yeah, and then he goes out into the world, and then that's when he realizes this suffering. He wanted to really focus on the suffering and what it means, and he really tackles out that thing, and how it's really mental if you think about it, because we're all going to die, we're all going to get sick. There's nothing you can do about it. Like a flower grows to a beautiful peak, and then it just shrivels up, and that's basically what we are.
Well, that's actually what the antidote to suffering is, to recognize that you're not that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, touch up on that for a second.
So he asks, we get sick, we grow old, and we die, and everything passes, and we suffer along the way because we are desiring, and we're also desiring for things not to happen. So we suffer this desire and aversion, this constant pattern. And even when we get what we want, we suffer because we don't want it to go away.
Interesting.
Even
Very
though
true.
everything falls away.
Yeah.
So he's just noticing this condition, this human condition of suffering. And he's asking, how can this be okay? Because he has an intuition that everything's okay in the face of suffering.
Right.
And so that's what Buddha's loved for, his extremely practical messaging in The End of Suffering. He was known as like the Great Doctor.
Yeah.
They called him the Great Doctor because of how
the
precise.
Great Physician. Yep.
The Great Physician, that's it. Yeah. And so I didn't actually come to truly appreciate that until I read Joseph Goldstein's really thick book on mindfulness, just called Mindfulness.
Right.
I've heard of that. Actually.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
book.
Oh my god.
That's on my list to get to books.
When if you're ever wanting to really hunker down and explore mindfulness in your own practice and the roots of mindfulness, that book is phenomenal. I fell in love with that.
Cool. And if you're ever trying to like hunker down and watch some like really cool movies and film, watch David Lynch. Yeah, because it can change your life too. You never know.
And that was another thing. Something about Lynch. What he always did was explore kind of explore the absurd nature of suffering, because characters would be in fear, and it never made any damn sense.
Yep.
He took the fear out of context. Usually, when people are full of fear, it has a contextual reason based on karma, cause and effect, and it's an eternal thing.
Yeah.
When you see it through a lens that's pure, this suffering can look really, really crude and unnecessary. And so when you're coming from that vantage point, no one likes to see it, and they want to rush to the aid.
Yeah, and the best example would just be Blue Velvet, and that's just like, if you want to be an intro film into Lynch before you really like start to get into some pretty heavy stuff, I would suggest probably that film to watch. Like I said, because it's more cohesive than the rest of his films. But just, why is Frank basically in Blue Velvet? Like, why are there people like Frank in this world? Until the Robins come, we're not going to get any love. And there's this darkness in the world. There's these evil people in the world. And why are we there? And why are they there? Why do they do the things they do? And Lynch gives even those characters depth, like even the twisted, sick ones of like, this is why he does the things he does, is because he's got, serious issues, and he has abandonment issues, and he's in love with somebody, but he doesn't know how to express himself the right way. He's a twisted psychopath regardless. But just having layers to just every, what's going on in his films are just... And I'm in a bunch of different groups and stuff on Facebook, and we just have so many awesome discussions about, like, what do you think this means? What do you think that means? Like, how do you interpret his work? How do you interpret that
Well, I think the thing about David Lynch is, just like a lot of these ancient scriptures, his work is layered. Yeah. So every person that watches a David Lynch film is going to interpret it somehow in their own way. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he purposely makes it that way.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. It's like this form of artwork. And even before we went live, we were talking about the mythos and the logos, where these two Greek terms, and they sort of battle each other. Whereas like the mythos is like, we look up to these myths of Apollo and Zeus, and we try to follow them and take those in our everyday life, whereas the logos was actually like this logical mathematical view towards the world, where it's like we can actually, if I poke a hole in this book, I can put my finger to the other side. We can change things. We can do things ourselves through practices like meditation or whatever. And I just wanted to touch on this real quick. So it's interesting that in the East, the ancient religion of the East is mostly Hinduism, just like the West is mostly Judaism. And in the West, we saw a sort of a revolution, I guess you could call it, with Christianity, where it sort of says, okay, the days of old, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, now I tell you to love your neighbor. And this sort of takes this 180 degree turn. And then in the East, we saw the Hindus, like the Buddhists, take the ideas of Hinduism and say, okay, the days of old was, Krishna telling Arjuna, action, go to war, do this, do that. Whereas I'm telling you, sometimes inaction is the right route to take. So these revolutions happen, and I think in this day and age, film, poetry, music is the new form of mythos in our everyday life.
Interesting.
And David Lynch is one of the biggest examples of modern day mythos of something that we can actually watch, and it can plant a seed in our head that later on grows into a tree and becomes part of our consciousness.
Yeah.
And that ties into the whole collective consciousness thing. And I don't know if you wanted to touch on the collective consciousness thing at all.
Well, I could just mention that if you went to Lynch and said, I know what you're doing, man. You're making like this really layered, and you're really commenting on some of the deepest layers of the psyche and the soul and all of that. And you could say that. And he's like, I catch an idea.
I get these ideas,
Yeah.
and then they come. I just love how he describes the way his ideas come to him, and then they go fleeting, and then he just grabs another idea, and then he runs with it. And it just,
Right.
But what he does say is, you want to infuse this pure consciousness self with work you're doing. So when he's making a painting, he makes a little bit of it and then sits and kind of looks at it. And that's not like this dull process. To anyone who's really engaged with anything, they'll tell you what they're doing is not a dull process.
Yeah.
It could look that way. But when they're really kind of like getting the feel, and I can't really speak on it. But he calls it like a process of just action and reaction.
It's also
and so something natural does come from it when it's coming from a higher source.
And there's also a flow.
Oh, sorry. I'll just say one. He doesn't take the credit. That's the most beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he's very humble about his work.
Well,
very humble about his work.
And Neil, you were like, he plants the seed, whatever. It's funny because my intro to David Lynch was Blue Velvet. I said, what the hell is this guy all about? Next film I watched was Mulholland Drive, right? The first time I watched it, I didn't like it, okay? Because I was so confused. I was like, what the frig happened at the end of this movie? I'm not going to say anything, spoilers or anything. But then I sat there for like literally a week and I couldn't get this film out of my mind. Like, wait, what the hell?
Yeah.
Wait, what happened? They opened a box, and then next thing you know, I went and revisited it because I was like, I got to watch this again. I don't understand what I just really watched. And I was younger too, so I really didn't understand too much what the hell I was watching. I watched it again. It became my favorite film of all time.
That's
my favorite film of all time.
See how that happens? It can go
I didn't like it when I first watched it.
Yeah.
And it was like Radiohead, too. That's a good way to describe Radiohead. When I first listened to Radiohead, I was like, this is kind of sad and clunky and dark. And then I slowly was like, this is the greatest music I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah.
I just had to get planted with me a little bit,
Yep.
So.
Inland Empire
is another one.
I am so haunted by that.
It's terrifying.
So beautiful.
And I was going to say that a lot of
I
this...
say it like Lynch. So beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of, like you said, the cause and effect aspect of everything. Like the action, reaction, linear timeline we like to think about is actually just one flow. It's like a flow like water. Like we're not limited to what our free will. We can do a lot. We have a lot of options right now. But there is like the one way, if you think about it. There is like the way that I can't explain it. Like I don't know if you could. Some people call it the Tao. Some people call it the but regardless of how you define is it linguistically, there's something there. There's some sort of like a path.
Yeah.
That leads to not suffering.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
What is that?
That I've heard it expressed as the great tradition, which is the tradition that's universal despite having all these variations.
Right.
And that tradition is for the human individual to transcend their limited notion of their self back home to this infinite, non-dimensional, meaning has no shape or form, perceiver, and to live from that. That is the shift that every good teacher is talking about. If you listen to Ram Dass, if you've heard of Ram Dass.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Ram Dass is good.
Absolutely phenomenal speaker. Alan Watts.
Alan Watts has got his book right there.
Yep.
Yeah. I've heard hours of both of them, Ram Dass and Alan Watts.
What they're talking about is the shift from identification with mind and body to the identification with consciousness. Ram Dass uses words like the soul.
Ralph Waldo Emerson uses nature as like his defining.
Like overmind too, or oversoul.
Yeah.
So I think what happens with some people, like Ram Dass, was really fell in love with all the variation and loved to express in any way he can. He quoted the Tao and also quoted Christianity and all this
some
stuff.
Vedic stuff too.
Vedic stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's all over the place.
All over the place.
Can't define Ram Dass.
No, because
can't.
And then some people thought he addressed once in one of his talks that he was getting people hooked up into spiritual materialism just because of how into all these things were. It was not true. He was a really brilliant speaker. But what he was talking about, I'll try to just paraphrase what he said about it. That the shift everyone's talking about is connecting to this higher self. At first, it's like an imaginary friend that you made up. But when you become absorbed in it, eventually that is your true self, and the imaginary friend is this ego mind that you once believed yourself to be very firmly.
Wow, that makes sense.
So there's so many different things you can tie that into. For one, I'll give you an example. Bruce Lee writes about self-actualization. And I think he gets it from the Tao, actually, because in one of the tantras, it talks about being like water. Here it is right here.
I've heard him say it.
True goodness is like water. It nurtures everything and harms nothing. Like water, it ever seeks the lowest place, the place that all others avoid. This is the way of the Tao. And it goes on to explain the flow of water, like trying to actually emulate water. It just goes with the flow. But it doesn't. It's not always going to be good. You're going to crash into a rock.
Yeah,
that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that though is best applied to the practice of meditation rather than going with the flow of whatever.
Right.
Something outside.
Right, because justice is like making justice is important too. Like we could just go with the flow, and like we lived in Nazi Germany, we didn't do anything to stop.
They say don't go with the flow.
Yeah, so that's why this whole balance between action and inaction is something that needs to be harnessed and really figured out, because we do have there are moments where action is necessary. There are moments when inaction is necessary. I'm trying to think where I was going with this, but like basically
water.
Talking about water. Being as much. It's like, okay, here's what I was gonna say. It says that it always tries to find the lowest place.
Yeah,
because of gravity, obviously. But in terms of spiritually, what it's saying is you're looking for the path, the easy path.
Well, it's the path of least resistance.
Right. So not necessarily the easiest path.
Can you show the clip of Bruce Lee talking about water real quick?
Sure.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Super cool.
Just showed. Yeah. Yeah, I just showed it. All right. But yeah, like, so finding the path of least resistance, I'm glad you corrected me on that, because I said the easy path. It's not always the easiest paths, but it's the necessary path. You know what I'm saying?
There's a beautiful thing from the Tao that from my edition, I hope I don't fail remembering this one, because it says, it was like water. Goodness is like water, but it also goes where most people completely avoid, which brings it closer to the Tao.
Yeah.
So that brings you to some of the grittier truths about approaching consciousness and knowing thyself means you're gonna face what you avoid. Otherwise, you're stuck in that karma of avoiding and desiring, wanting what is not present and avoiding what is present.
Yeah.
Is the human condition of suffering, and can be said to be all ego is.
Wow.
Sounds like it. Sounds like a pretty good description.
And then so back to the action versus inaction thing. Our actions will give us karma, which is what we don't want.
No, karma is not actually it's not given that value.
Right. And there's dharma, where you're actually getting back, like you're actually gaining something from your actions. Like it actually improves you a little bit.
I think that, well, here's my understanding. Dharma, according to the Vedas, was really pretty much just what you do. Like a dharma is like, I was born to be a locksmith.
The self, the who you are, like the natural self.
Oh no, not even that. Dharma is actually a little bit more earthy. Dharma is just your dharma is to put on the podcast. Dharma is really just
the way.
Well, in the Taoist terms?
No, just dharma.
Dharma is what your purpose is.
Yeah, your purpose, right?
Yeah,
that's what I'm getting at.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's their understanding.
Whereas
it's also used as a way to. It's used in other ways, but that's the way I kind of I
yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. And then there's
dharma
karma.
Of a washing machine is to do a load of laundry.
Yeah,
it's a very simple thing.
And
it's not even spiritual. Really.
It sounds pretty easy.
And then to experience karma is to experience the reactions to your actions. Like whatever it is that you take, whatever, like you do something, and the reaction to that's the karma of it. That's like the response that the universe gives you.
Karma is just like the dance of life.
Yeah.
So yeah,
a push and pull.
But it's not like this.
You throw a boomerang and it comes back and pops you in the head. You know.
Right.
That's sort of there's a Western understanding of karma that emphasizes what goes around comes around, and there's a truth to that. There's an intelligence to that.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, karma is just cause and effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I think where people get that whole karma, in the sense that I'm talking about, is actually from the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, where he's explaining karma and dharma to him, and he's sort of giving it he sort of tells it to him like, you want dharma and you don't want karma, sort of.
Yeah,
but it's way more complicated than just that, though. Like you said.
Should we explain the premise of the Bhagavad Gita just quickly?
Yeah. Do you want to do it?
Well, just so because you were talking about it, that it's an exchange between Lord Krishna, who is pretty much God embodied, talking with Arjuna, who is this great warrior, who's a archer. Right.
He was going to battle against his uncle, which is Lord Bhishma of the North. I believe he was the North. Yeah, no, that's what it was. Bhishma was the prince of the North. Arjuna was the prince of the South. It was the Dravidians versus the Hindis, I think they were called, actually. Yeah, the Hindis. And this was the battle that's about to take place. Now, Arjuna, I'll let you take it away after this part, the meeting, but the premise is Arjuna has to go fight his uncle in a war over India, and he doesn't want to do it. His consciousness is telling him, I love my uncle. Why would I want to go to war? Why would I want to kill all these people? I don't want to do that. I want to make peace with these people. But what does Krishna tell him?
Yeah.
You want to take it from there?
Yeah, the reason why this is still such a spicy text is that Krishna tells him that you must fight.
Yeah.
And so...
That's a guy.
So a lot of people might say, why is this spiritual book telling me to fight?
Yeah.
It's not telling you to fight. It's telling Arjuna to fight.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's not telling you to fight in every single... So that's
Don't fight anyone.
That's the Buddhist...
especially with a bow and arrow.
The Buddhists took that because that's canon. According to Buddhists, that's canon. Like that's part of their. They look back to the Vedas and the Mahabharata, just like a Christian would look at the Old Testament for the Torah. So they don't like hide. They don't neglect that part, but they also bring in the aspect of that was what he was telling to Prince Aruna. Christian might tell you something different.
Yeah,
your situation. He will say something different to you because you're a different individual. You're in a different situation.
You're in a different karmic load.
So that's what they were sort of correcting that in a way where a lot of people misunderstood what that meant.
Yeah. So
instead of going to war with everyone you meet, sometimes you have to have a different action.
Yeah. That's why I think the Bhagavad Gita is so compelling, is because it captures the human journey.
It really does.
Krishna is descending from a land of perfect peace in the middle of like a horrific war. That's like
horrific
the way to
war.
describe it is like there's like an evil presence and everyone is just ready to kill each other.
Right.
And he's saying, no, you got to do this. You got to do what you got to do. But he's also telling him how to transcend.
Right.
That's the heart of it, is that we're right here. We're suspended above this battle, but you're also going to know your essence while you complete your dharma, while you fulfill your dharma. And
then there's a really trippy part in the Bhagavad Gita where he shows Prince Aruna the universe. And he shows him the universe is him. It's Krishna. And he turns into this big giant monster with fangs and he's eating worlds. And he's like, this is the fate of the universe. And he's showing you this is like he scares the hell out of Aruna and then brings him back to the battle. And it sort of brings his mindset into the right spot. Like it puts him in perspective. Like, okay, this is bigger than me.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so sometimes we don't. Sometimes we have to take the course of action we might not necessarily want, but it's bigger than me.
What would be the path of least resistance for Arjuna to? That's the question, I guess. But
yeah,
and I'm still kind of just seeping into that mystery of the Gita.
It's so deep, though.
So if that says to fight, and then we have like the Gandhi situation, it's telling him the opposite. Am I way off here with like Gandhi? By the way, like
no,
I'm not. I haven't brushed up on the Gandhi.
No.
I just feel like he's the opposite of what you're saying because, like, I guess he practiced some sort of
Hinduism.
Yeah.
But Gandhi understood that every situation, like we were just talking about, Gandhi understood that every situation is different.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have like
his way to fight. I guess I know what you're saying. Like his way to fight was to not fight and to just not eat. That was his way of fighting.
Well, it wasn't necessary because there wasn't the momentum of this monstrous war. Yeah. And they do describe it as a force of great evil was being fought.
Yeah, I think they use the term Mali.
Yeah.
Which is like the
so it's a different situation.
Yeah.
Completely. But it invites you to assess things. And that in itself, I would say this though, these ideas in themselves aren't going to allow that kind of insight. What will allow the insight on the situation we're in is the transcending, and transcending the surface situation, however that is presenting itself. Because you can only glean from messages, but the experience of knowing yourself brings things into a kind of clarity because you're also seeing with the heart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the heart knows the interconnectedness. The heart knows it's the same self.
Yeah. And it's funny because...
And you don't see the divisions. And you realize that there's division amok. Sorry, yeah.
I'm listening. I'm listening to you. And it's so deep because even on the psychotherapy side of things or the psychology side of things, you see these sort of principles sort of agree. But now it's more technical. So like, for example, Nietzsche writes about the Superman, whereas the Superman where he says that mankind is just a ladder to the Superman. So we're always trying to evolve and get to a place of perfectness, and you always must be contributing to that place. So it's like a collective consciousness of people on this planet are all gearing towards the ultimate, whatever you want to call it, heaven, nirvana, Superman, whatever. There's always, these are just words describing one thing that's a reality. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess Nietzsche, I never really had a lot of trust for that guy.
Yeah.
I felt a little freaked out by him. This
Yeah,
guy,
really?
This guy, might be a little of a, I don't know, an ego is all I could really say.
Well, that's funny because that's what he wrote about, is the ego and the. Well, I guess that's more Freudian, but he also wrote about the death of the ego as well. But he was super.
You can write about the death of the ego and still be an ego.
No, I totally agree that Nietzsche was definitely.
I mean,
a character.
Freud had a superego on him. I mean,
yeah.
Freud actually wrote a book called The Superego.
well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
He describes what the idea
But,
of ego.
But
He also was in talks of possibly having sex with his stepsister, and he was a cokehead. So he was definitely not just because.
yeah,
he,
no.
Just
Now,
because
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, and
people who try to reach these levels of intellect are usually somewhat obscure.
Yeah, usually they have experiences with near-death experiences, or they have some really bad mental health issues.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
no,
I'm not gonna
there's
say
no
this-
there's
people
no
that are-
perfect prophet that's going to come with all the answers, but you can
Well,
also you can always get something.
To
Like
come up
Nietzsche
with,
though, the way he wrote was just unbelievable. Every syllable meant something. Every syllable had its own story behind it. Like every word was put there, placed there, like he was building a tower, like he was building something. Like it was all constructed so confinedly, deeply. Every layer, I don't know.
But I feel like there was always with him, he could have all these structures and have all these articulations, but there's still some kind of core that's really rather pissed.
Yeah, there's a lot of nihilism there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It's
I think
mostly nihilistic stuff in there. That's what I take from is the nihilism kind of takes control of most of it for me.
And that's a really, really good way of describing Nietzsche. Is he had a lot of nihilism within his philosophy. He definitely had exactly. You just said it. He was very nihilistic, especially the book called "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," which is the book where he wrote "God is Dead," and then he wrote about the Superman. That whole book was just a lot, tons of nihilism. We're not. Humanity itself is doomed, and it was what are you doing to fix that?
And he was.
That was his question to the reader.
He's one of the most intelligent writers, and it was. But I just for David Lynch, for example, he's a guy I'd want to get behind more because of just kind of what the guy practices every day in his life. You know what I mean? I want to mirror someone like that because I know that they want to be they have some good morality in their life at least. I just feel like Nietzsche was just
well, that's what.
None of us really matter, and we all just kind of hit the wall. And some of us kind of are brighter than others, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a it can be a really, really volatile and confusing mixture when somebody has some access, probably. He had access to this higher consciousness, but it was probably really also mixed in with this lower self.
Yeah.
And when you get that kind of thing, that can be really weird. And it's actually not so. I think it's sort of familiar. I think there's a lot of people that have this kind of mixture going on, and you just know that there's some kind of crazy core. Because they're still operating from a basically fearful, separateness.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
And I think that those.
No, and I just to kind of trickle off what you're saying a little bit. I feel not to take away from Nietzsche, but it just seemed like he was kind of snotty, and he had this
for sure.
I figured it out.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, you guys are all stupid. You know what I mean? He just had this way about him that
he's very intimidating.
He was. He was intimidating.
Yeah.
He was a very intellectual. And he figured it out. That's why I couldn't care for the guy because he just figured it all out.
I guess you're right about that.
And then that's my only. I mean, the guy had some brilliant. He said some of the most brilliant things I've ever.
Nietzsche, are you happy?
Yeah, but
that's a good question.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
And that brings us back to this whole topic is no matter what your philosophy is, what your religion is, what's up with you? Like, are you in a state of bliss? Are you in a state of nirvana? Are you okay? Are you breathing good? And that's what brings us back to this meditation thing is like the self. Know thyself. Yeah. And then you got even going back to the ancient Greeks, the Hermetic philosophy was all is mind, right? That this is all just the universe is just all just our mentality, and we're just in it, and we're all a part of it, and there's a collective consciousness within that we all can tap into.
Yeah.
But to know thyself is not easy. No. So there's the ego that you're battling against, and then
some would disagree with that.
Okay, touch on that. I want to hear what you.
There was a Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, and I only bring him up because of this one.
I know you're talking about.
Yeah, I only bring him up because this one thing he said is that if you could not yourself for one instant, you would know the peace of God.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that.
Not meaning N-A-U-G-H-T, meaning to basically forget about yourself.
Yeah.
If you can forget about the concept of your
Why would that be nice?
Yeah.
Well, it's just in an instant.
Yeah.
You realize that it's sort of something appearing in your awareness.
Yeah.
Or it could be a whole conglomeration of thoughts, but it doesn't mean they're appearing anywhere else but your own awareness.
Without a doubt. And we kind of talked about this before too, like just like having the having too much thinking going on, you know, not being able to control like your thoughts and not, like you said, seeing your thoughts. Like I thought about before the podcast, like I'm like thinking to myself, I'm shaving a little too early. I'm probably gonna cut myself shaving, like. And should I bring it up on the podcast if I cut myself shaving, which I'm doing right now, you know? Yeah. And next thing you know, I cut myself shaving, you know? And I'm thinking like, oh shit, you know, like I guess I can kind of talk to him about that, trying to control my thoughts a little bit because I thought about cutting myself shaving for so long that I didn't realize I cut myself shaving. You know?
Yeah.
The good teachers will point out always, and they'll keep reminding because it's something you got to hear over and over and over again, and then start to confirm it in your own experience, that the self is always and already present. And it's always and already who you are.
Yeah.
And people get a little frustrated by that because it's like, well, there's nothing to do or something.
Yeah.
No, there is a kind of effort to be made in taking up sadhana, which is practice, which is a kind of an earnest and honest effort to realize yourself. Meditation, learning from teachers, reading, however that goes, because it's different for everybody too. But so there was that kind of effort, just in the same thing of like, it's the same way as musicians, they hit a kind of effortlessness in their performance, and it's beautiful, and there's no one performing, and it's kind of they're in this flow, and everything's happening, and it's this brilliant payoff for the artist and for the people who appreciate the art, because everyone can kind of feel that that's what's going on. Mm-hmm. So that's effortless. It wasn't effortlessness to make the money to buy your guitar or to dedicate time to practicing and learning your instrument. So there is a real process that anybody can take up if they're curious enough or if they're suffering enough, which frankly I think is the real
question,
the real tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suffering is extremely powerful tool to get out of suffering. It's been said that suffering really is the bell that's ringing in your life saying you've forgotten yourself.
I agree with that 100%.
So in the actual individual's experience of suffering, true suffering, because most people are suffering at a low level and maybe have some things in their life that are just keeping them going and it's not so bad and it's manageable and stuff. Yeah. But when you're really suffering to the point where you're just like, this isn't right. Where you start to like...
Something's got to change.
For me, it was basically I was really indignant against suffering of like, this is not the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm still suffering. I'm like, no. Look around. Everything is full of bliss. Everything is perfectly still and silent and beautiful. Suffering is not true. So even sometimes with that kind of acuteness, I'd have to be really careful with the Buddha's Four Noble Truths of life is suffering, and because Buddhists will get kind of It's like, well, you can't forget the first noble truth. Life is suffering. It's like, no. It's not. He was pointing people the way out of suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
The first noble truth is best said as, let's face it, you are suffering.
Right.
Let's face it, you're wanting what is not present, and you're not wanting what is present.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because that's a lot of people think that's what Buddhism is all about, is just accepting that we're going to be our fate. But really, it's not just about that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's about knowing who you are.
Right. Knowing thyself.
Yep. And so, in my experience, and this is still quarantine time, basically, and it's been the off season for me, work. So I've been really at this, meditating like hours a day. And the goal that I've come to understand is to question the existence of the sufferer. When you are really looking and see if you can find this person, this entity that's suffering, the one that feels lack, the one that feels a sense of unfulfillment, no matter how small. When you're really, really investigating and saying, who's really there? In my experience, I've come to see that it's not real. And what happens is that there's this life, the consciousness fueled, really, the consciousness was the source of the separate self. The separate self was a bit of creativity pulled from this source. And you believe it to be yourself. And there's all this energy going to it because you're trying to maintain it in some way. It's trying to survive.
Yeah.
The consciousness is really, there's all this energy going to it.
Yeah.
But it's like watering a tree that bears terrible fruit because it makes you suffer.
Right.
So what seems to happen, the more
good
you
analogy.
recognize that that separate self that isn't there, is that you just you can't go back to something that's not real when you've seen it enough.
I'll tell you from my point, the way it happened for me was in prison, actually, where this all kicked in, where I had to, in the beginning, and this has nothing to do with actually trying Transcendental Meditation. This just happened naturally, and I noticed this later on. Like, even right now, thinking back, I'm noticing it happening by itself, whereas at first, being in the cell, I would lose breath. I feel like I can't breathe because of all the anxiety. And over time, I can't explain it, I started to realize that my mind is not in jail. My mind can go wherever it wants to go. Yeah. I can just sit here, I can read a book, I can read a magazine, and I can float off into space. And I learned how to do that. And I didn't know what it was until I started reading about Rolf Emerson and some of the people that talk about Transcendental Meditation, ancient Greek philosophy, Alan Watts, and I started hearing these people talk about that's what happened to me. I was meditating. I didn't even know what I was doing, but my body naturally found that I had no choice. I was at the bottom of the bottom. There's nothing I can do but naturally try to meditate, and that was what I could have did. I probably could have did it better if I was more informed about it, which is what we're talking about. But it happened regardless, and I was like, "Wow, that is true." You know what I'm saying? Like that focusing on your breathing, that calmness, that self-actualization, which is different than self-awareness, by the way. Self-actualization is knowing all your defects and your positive attributes of yourself and applying it, whether self-awareness is just being like, oh, I know I'm fucked up, I'm in jail, I know where I'm at. You know what I'm saying? There's a big difference there.
Yeah. Self-actualization that comes from Jung, I think. And I never quite...
That might be true, yeah.
I never completely trusted it because I think a lot of people could easily think that to be the actualization of the ego self, when that can't be true because there's actually no ego. So self-actualization in the right perspective would be, I think, a person that's infused with their own unbounded self, so that the natural being expresses itself just in harmony.
Yeah.
Would be self-actualization. But I think something about the term seems to be loaded with, I gotta actualize myself here. I gotta get my shit together.
That's true.
Which is the constant berating ego mind.
Yeah, that's a good point, dude. Wow.
Yeah, and this is we just want like the more we learn, the more people learn about this. You know what I mean? That they're going to know more about it. Is just to hear people with experiences that practice this stuff.
And you're talking about experiences. Sometimes it can be completely where you didn't expect it to happen. For example, psychedelics. People take mushrooms, have a spiritual awakening that changes their life forever. DMT, the same way. I mean, I can tell you all about that. DMT literally smacks you in the face and brings you to a world full of geometric prisms and colors and gold and angels and aliens, and brings you back to reality. And then all of a sudden you become enlightened to the fact that there is a realm that we're in. There is this spiritual world that we can't see, that we can try to tap into.
The Terence McKenna voice is not far away from the David Lynch voice.
Yes, thank you. Terence McKenna. I'm glad you brought up that name.
There's nothing that can prepare you for the DMT.
You sound exactly like it, dude. You're a good impersonator.
Well, they're really close.
Yeah.
Like, they actually sound kind of the same.
Yeah, they do.
He's like Ned Flanders and David Lynch and Terence McKenna kind of have the same voice.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they have three different approaches to one thing. Like, they're all throwing their own dart at one dartboard. Whereas McKenna comes from the psychonaut type of philosophy, where you can attain these transcendental experiences through the action of taking mushroom or drinking ayahuasca tea.
There's a pretty, from my point of view, a pretty clear flaw with that.
Tell it.
That it's just simply that seeking experiences is suffering.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
And you don't get to the plane of serenity as a permanent living space on psychedelics. Which
brings me to my next point, and I'm glad you just said that. Perfect timing too. Is that there's no higher way to meditate than without anything, with just your mind.
Yeah.
You cannot reach, no psychedelic will reach you to a higher level than you can with your own mind. And there are yogis, I actually looked it up when I was inside. There's these yogis that practice Transcendental Meditation, and they swear that they can reach psychedelic states mentally just by sitting in one spot and focusing on certain things. There's also healing aspects they talk about that these yogis perform. They can heal cancer and sickness, and by meditating, by thought.
Yeah.
Which is so, I feel like society needs to explore that more. We as a society need to explore that more.
Well, I think that part of the problem here is that it's an exploration into the consciousness paradigm of the physical world. The consciousness paradigm of the physical world is that everything is consciousness, and that consciousness does not arise out of interactions in the brain. In other words, consciousness is not an outcome of physical forces. Physical forces, chemical reactions, all structures, all physiology, all form is an expression of pure consciousness. And that consciousness is the primary.
Interesting.
And this, to me, is the truth. And this is also pretty much still laughed at. Like, mainstream science are very, very rigid. They're still very, very dogmatic about the materialist paradigm, which is
understandable, because science, if you look at the scientific method itself, there's no bullshit to be played. It is, if I drop this from here, it's going to hit the ground. If it floats up in the air, then all of a sudden we got to figure out why it floated in the air. They don't care about what the reason for it. Science just wants to know if it does it, if things do what they do.
Yeah, they almost can't even comment on it. I think like, to that kind of like purely logistical mind, it pretty much just blows it.
Yeah,
they can't. Most of them. I mean, not all of them. Not all of them. Quantum physics is challenging every materialist, and if that's a fact. If it's not challenging them, they're not really paying attention.
Yeah,
the quantum physics are showing us.
Quantum physics shows us that when you go down to the levels of subatomic, all the rules of Newtonian physics goes out the door, and we don't even understand it at all. It's not even like things that we think are hollow. Like they're saying that atoms are empty. Yeah, which is like emptiness. that makes me think: are we in a simulation? Is this all just a hologram? And a lot of scientists think that. That's actually sort of a becoming more mainstream now in the realm of science is that they don't want to call it a simulation because then it throws in that who's making the simulation, and they don't want to even get into that stuff. But they will acknowledge like there's something going on here.
I heard it put it this way that that chair, I'm pointing at a chair in the studio, and the thought chair is these two things, they're both objects in a way. The chair is a physical object. The thought chair is an object in the sense that a thought is an object that appears in the mind. It doesn't have like
I learned
physical
about this in my popular psychology class.
But the expression is that these are coming from the same thing. Both are coming from the same source. That the conceptual existence of thought and the physical existence of material is the same. And this dives into a wildly, seemingly abstract place because the mind is made of thoughts and can't really go, because the mind itself is objective phenomena. Objective phenomena cannot transcend itself. To transcend means to go beyond all of these forms and to understand the source of any shape at all. Thought itself has a kind of shape. It's not, cut and dry out here, but it has a beginning and an end. And something remains even when a thought goes.
Yeah, it's true.
So the experience of transcendence, the experience of stepping out, which is the same thing as stepping out of karma, is the enlightener. But it's not overnight. Mind becomes more and more infused with its source. And it starts to understand things. But it can be difficult to talk about. That's why you have some
it's very
metaphors.
Difficult. It's very difficult. And that's where these analogies come in, is because you can't put a finger on it. So like these ancient scribes and philosophers and prophets, whatever you want to call them, they wrote these parables and these analogies of going into a fish for 3 days and coming out and then going to a whole city to preach. Like that's the Jonah I'm just talking about. Why did he die and go into a fish for 3 days before he preached to the city of Nineveh? Like that's what we're getting at, is like this is something, it's another level. It's like higher consciousness, what we're getting at. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But the higher consciousness is just consciousness.
Yeah, that's another thing. And Alan Watts always talks about that. It's like you attain all these levels, I guess you could call it, until once you reach the highest level, it's like, oh, you just remembered that you're remembering yourself.
Yep.
You just remembered yourself.
Yeah.
You forget the whole time from you were born until you reached the quote unquote nirvana. It was just you're just remembering yourself, who you are.
Yep.
Something about that is like that's super deep,
Yeah, but it's also ordinary. If there's anything I'd like to say or do on this podcast, it would be to say that it would do us really well to forget the myth that it's rare or exotic.
That's something I struggle with too.
Yeah, it's something that's sort of ingrained in it, like it's part of our conditioning.
It's just impossible nirvana to achieve of this, like that's what it sounds like sometimes. And it's not exactly.
It's not.
That's what I'll perceive it and not want to even give it an effort, because I'm like, I can't do it. I'm an anxious person. I won't be able to. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
that's
that cancels
definitely
me off to it.
And
I need to hear more people say, "Hey, listen, this is not that hard." You just and even right before we were on, he was telling me like, everything you're thinking is completely normal, like you're just like you're gonna stumble. You're supposed to stumble when you're doing it. You're not supposed to get it. And that's what he was trying to get at me before. And I was like, okay, that kind of makes more sense than me trying to be zen all the time. You know what I mean? Just giving it an effort. Wanting to change some things because not agreeing with how I'm feeling. Because I know it can be a tool to help me, and what somebody like me thinks is it's this impossible thing to achieve,
So
but it's not.
No.
So closing out, Zach, if you had one recommendation for someone sitting there who's completely anxious, out of their mind, might be on some medication or something, and doesn't understand or doesn't even think that meditating could help them, what would you say? Sorry to throw that on to you at the last second.
Well, there's the intimacy that might result in kind of some touch, like hand in hand, and some looking at each other. If this is, because I'm thinking of some real suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
So sometimes in those situations, the only communicator is your own presence. Something that there's just an intuition that peace is the context in which your suffering's happening. And when someone's in touch with that and is embodying it, that thing can be expressed without words. If this was more of a I'm suffering and I don't think it's going to work kind of debate thing, I'm not good at answering.
No. You're getting right to the nuts of it. Is like if that's you have to get out of that mentality that's not going to help you. It's
I would try to just sort of say in the most human and ordinary terms possible. It's just not. That's not true.
Right.
Yeah.
Look, and then
just try it
and try to honestly look at yourself. That's what I had to do.
Yeah.
I couldn't just accept that. I couldn't just imagine myself as everything's good and fine, dandy, or feel bad for me. I need help from everyone else. I had to actually look at, like you said, the sufferer. Why am I in this spot? What did I do?
Well, they say, please end my suffering. And the master says, show me the one who's suffering. And they say, it's me. I say, no. Try to produce the one who's suffering. And they're not like checkmated intellectually. They're really being asked to go and find this sufferer.
Dig deeper.
And what happens every time is they can't find it, and I can't find it. And when you realize you can't find it, there's something here that realizes it.
That was it. That was the answer right there. That was the answer I'm looking for.
And that is yourself.
That is the self.
That's the true being. And it's something that you start to vaguely, I don't want to say resent, but I'll just say it for this purpose, you start to vaguely resent any kind of ridiculousness that this was something far out. Yeah. Or something Eastern, or something
right,
like that. It's not at all.
It's not.
It's your birthright. They'll tell you it's your birthright, and it is your birthright. And the only reason you might call it rare, or at least not common, is because people have their own kind of hookup. People have their own kind of paths, and it might not be relevant to them in this lifetime to wake up. They might have all kinds of work to do. Operating from a limited sense of self that doesn't cause them so much suffering and doesn't cause others so much suffering that it's just not really relevant. The people who are really suffering, that's the ones who are closer to the self. Or suffering, I've heard the phrase, the wound flags the entrance to the soul.
Wow.
Some people think that our modern era, a lot of people are getting closer to that. Yeah. It makes some sense to me, because there's a lot of things on the material level that aren't making a lot of sense. Desires are drying up. Certain desires that created an identity for a whole nation are not making all that much sense, and we're left with the trauma of division, the trauma of things that have resulted in racism and fearing each other and hating each other, and people are trying to come to terms with that at a level that no one. It seems like we're trying to finish this thing, but we're not getting to the transcendence that we're really gonna need.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not so scared, because I think, like we've been talking about, suffering is this amazing teacher.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Trust me.
And you're gonna be forced to know yourself.
Yeah.
If we're gonna survive.
There's times where you're forced to, all right?
If we're going to survive, it means we're probably touching into they call the unified field of consciousness, the source of all, it very freely gives all resolutions, all solutions come from this plane of awareness. So all the solutions are there. The only problems that exist are there because of our limited scope. And it's not strange. It's not mystical. You can get to a level of understanding where you don't even need a term like spiritual anymore. Spiritual is a very, very loaded word.
It is.
Spirit is a beautiful word, and it's another word for consciousness. I do like it because it has a certain kind of heart to it.
Yeah.
But we're always invited, as long as we're on our bodies, to use it, use our time, use our bodies to know thyself.
That was deep. I was gonna end. I think we need to end right on that. And
one more thing
go
too
ahead.
about like the David Lynch stuff too. Like to anybody that's watching, that's like, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, I just have to say, like, at the bottom of my heart, like David Lynch's work has truly not only like inspired me, but it's changed my life for the better. You know,
Me too.
And I think there's a lot of people that feel the same way about his work. And it might sound a little like weird at first because some of his work's kind of, you know, very surreal and it's very dreamlike and nightmarish, I guess you can say. But man, if you guys really want to watch something that's good, man, check some of his work out. You know, he's got Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive. That's a good one. Twin Peaks.
Eraserhead.
Eraserhead.
And and that's another thing. And we touched on the logos and the mythos thing. And real quick, I feel like that's going to be the future of myth telling and, you know, whatever, like our guidelines to finding something to strive for is film, entertainment, music, like poetry. Those are the things that sort of give us a little push and sort of like incentivize us in different areas of life. Mm-hmm. So David Lynch is like almost like you can call him like a modern day prophet in a weird way.
I mean, almost in a way is,
because that's what this, that's what the idea of the mythos is. It's like we have the power to tell these stories and to within these stories package punches of reality, and you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's what I'm getting at is like those are the things that
I get so excited about his work. Like, I get so excited about showing other people his work and stuff. And sometimes, like, I'll like be like on a date with some chick, and I'll try to show it to him, and like they won't like it right away. Like, I'll know, like,
test.
And that's
right away. I'm like, it's not gonna work with that person. They definitely do. It's like, that's weird.
And everyone's different.
Just
like like not everybody's Prince Arjuno.
Yeah.
Everybody has their own path.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. And you can start to appreciate all those different places.
Yeah.
You can be very identified with Lynch World, and then you can step into some. Your consciousness, and you start to appreciate things you don't even like.
Yeah.
You just say, this is really a good thing.
And you know,
it's not like my taste, but it's just, I am appreciating this, and then you're just falling in love without condition.
And also, to add to what you just said, is we a lot of people like to, in this modern world, we like to bash religion as like being this like primitive thing, that we're past that, and we've figured out that the world is much, those texts don't mean anything. But for some people, finding Islam, finding Christianity, whatever, that is their mythos. That is their that is what they're seeking. That is their path. It becomes the dharma for them, is to follow, to submit to Allah, or whatever. Like whatever their path is, like that could be the same thing as someone watching David Lynch and gaining higher consciousness from that. So I think we have to also factor in that everyone has their own path, and you know what I'm saying, and it's a lot more complicated than just one.
You're right. I mean, because when you get like taste of it, you want to go and tell everybody, and
this works for me, it'll work for everybody.
Absolutely.
And
I'm guilty of that.
Everyone is.
We're all guilty of that.
But this has been real, man. Thanks for coming on, and
this is really cool.
Definitely maybe do it again sometime,
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you guys.
All right.
Jet forward and really expand your ball of consciousness. Really, you've got to get it from that deepest level. Transcendental meditation, just picture it as a key that opens the door to that. Nothing more. That is what you want. What it opens the door to, the unified field, pure bliss consciousness, eternal, unbounded, infinite ocean of it. That's what you want to experience.